Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into the really critical world of cybersecurity incident response.
That's right. And for you, our listener, we've gathered quite a bit of material guidance, regulatory updates, some insights on critical infrastructure resilience, even what people are talking about online.
Yeah, a whole stack. We've got info from Signia, foundational stuff from NIST, updates from CISA, thoughts from MITRE, even a peek at Reddit discussions and some data on nation-state threats.
And our mission today is really to cut through all that, pull out the absolute must-knows. We want to extract the key insights.
Exactly. Help you understand the best practices, navigate what's changing with regulations, and really grasp the challenges we're facing, especially looking ahead at 2025 and beyond.
We're aiming for those aha moments, understanding the big picture without getting totally lost in the technical weeds.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Why is this whole incident response thing so important? I mean, we hear about breaches all the time, but why focus specifically on the response part?
Well, look, the hard truth is that even the absolute best defenses aren't foolproof. They're just not. Incidents are going to happen.
It's not an if, it's a when.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You can invest a ton in prevention, and you absolutely should. But a clever attacker, or sometimes just, human error, means something will eventually get through.
Okay.
And that's where response becomes critical. Signia's analysis puts it really plainly. Rapid detection is absolutely key to minimizing the impact of any cyber incident. And that's not just like an IT problem. It has real financial consequences.
Financial consequences. Tell me more about that. Does responding faster actually, save money?
Oh, absolutely. And the Signia data gives us a pretty compelling statistic here. They found that breaches that were identified and contained within 200 days cost significantly less to resolve.
How much less?
About 23% less on average.
Wow, 23%. Just for getting it under control faster.
Yeah.
That's a huge incentive right there.
It really is.
So the insight isn't just the number itself. It's that effective response. It's not just defense. It's actually a measurable business driver. It hits the bottom line.
Exactly. It totally flips the script on how maybe some organizations think about their IR budget. It shifts it from being just a cost center to being a cost mitigator.
Right.
And think about what makes hitting that speed difficult. Breaches involving stolen credentials. They're some of the trickiest. They take the longest to spot and contain. Signia notes those average 292 days.
292 days. That's nearly a whole year an attacker could be lurking around inside a network.
Ah.
Okay, that makes perfect sense why detection and containment speed is so critical then.
Precisely. I mean, the longer an attacker is inside, moving around, stealing data, the more damage they do, and the higher the cost inevitably climbs. But look, this isn't exactly a new idea. NIST has been highlighting this need for a long time, even in their older guidance.
Right, the NIST Special Publication 861, that's been sort of the go-to guide for computer security incident handling for years, hasn't it?
It really has been foundational.
And even the older revision, too, it clearly stated that cybersecurity attacks are, quote, numerous, diverse, damaging, and disruptive.
Yes, and it explicitly says that while, sure, preventive activities are essential, they help reduce the number of incidents, but they just can't stop everything. So effective response is absolutely necessary to mitigate the impact when prevention fails.
Makes sense.
And for U.S. federal agencies, it's not even optional. FISMA, that's the Federal Information Security Management Act, it actually requires them to establish these incident response capabilities. It's mandated by law.
So whether you're, say, prepping for a meeting about your own organization's security, or just trying to understand the latest breach headlines, or maybe you're just curious about how all this digital stuff works, understanding incident response isn't some niche technical thing.
Not at all.
It's crucial for grasping modern digital risk.
Because incidents, well, they're just something you have to be prepared for.
It's truly foundational knowledge, and it applies everywhere, not just in government. Okay, let's unpack this by going back to those building blocks, specifically that NIST guidance. SP 800-61, the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. Revision 2 has been hugely influential, right?
Immensely influential, yes. But, and this is really important context we need to get out right up front while we're going to talk about the core concepts from Revision 2 because they are foundational. That document, 800-61R2, it now has a warning notice on it. As of April 3rd, 2025, it's officially withdrawn. It's been superseded by Revision 3, SP 800-61R3.
Withdrawn. Okay, so we're looking at the history, the core ideas that laid the groundwork, but the official guidance has moved on. What's the new one called and why the change? fundamentally.
The successor, R3, is titled Incident Response Recommendations and Considerations for Cybersecurity Risk Management, a CSF 2.0 Community Profile.
CSF 2.0 Community Profile.
Exactly. And the fact that it's specifically called out like that, tied to CSF 2.0 NIST's cybersecurity framework, that's a really significant evolution we definitely need to circle back to later. It shows how IR is now really explicitly linked into that broader framework.
Got it. So R2 gave us the core concepts, the history. R3 is the modern take, tied into CSF 2.0. Interesting to see some author overlap too. Karen Scarfone was on R2 and is also listed on R3, so continuity but also new perspectives.
Exactly. And even though R2 is withdrawn, its purpose, as it stated itself, was to provide guidelines for establishing IR capabilities and handling incidents. Primarily for federal agencies, yes, but it always said others could use it voluntarily. Its core principles are still incredibly relevant for anyone building or improving an IR program today.
Right. And the absolute core of that guidance in Revision 2 is captured in that lifecycle model, Figure 3.1. What are those main phases everyone should understand?
Yeah. NIST 800-61.2 breaks it down into 4 main phases, usually shown as a cycle. First, preparation, then detection and analysis. After that, containment, eradication, and recovery. And finally, post-incident activity.
Is it always step 1, step 2, step 3, or is it more fluid than that?
Oh, definitely more fluid. The diagrams usually show arrows looping back for a reason. These phases aren't always strictly sequential, you know?
Right.
You might be deep into recovery, fixing systems, and then bam, you discover more affected machines you missed, which throws you right back into detection and analysis. Or maybe containment isn't just one step, but something you have to keep doing throughout eradication and recovery.
Okay.
But these phases, they give you a logical structure, a way to think about the whole process from way before anything happens, right through to learning from it afterwards.
Let's dive into that first phase then. Preparation. Sounds like the foundation. What does NIST emphasize here?
Preparation is, well, it's everything you do before an incident hits. And it's really got 2 main goals. Getting ready to respond effectively when something does happen, and also actively working to prevent incidents from happening in the first place.
Okay. So it's not just having the fire extinguisher ready. It's also fireproofing the building and planning your escape routes.
That's a great analogy, yeah. The guidance lists key elements here. First, actually establishing the incident response capability itself, meaning having a clear policy, a solid plan, and detailed procedures. We can talk more about those later.
Okay.
Then there's the whole incident prevention side. Things like good host security, hardening systems, patching promptly, using least privilege so people only have the access they absolutely need, robust logging, continuous monitoring, network security, 2 strong perimeters, good authentication, encrypting sensitive data.
Standard security hygiene, basically.
A lot of it is, yes. Plus, dedicated malware prevention and, really importantly, user awareness and training. Because people are often the weak link or the target. It also includes setting up agreements beforehand, like MOUs, with any external groups you might need help from.
That covers a lot on the prevention and planning side. What about prepping the actual response toolkit? What specific tools and resources does NIST say you should have ready to go?
Right, the hands-on stuff, they list quite a few things. For communication during a crisis, you need secure channels, maybe encrypted comms, and potentially a dedicated war room, or at least a plan for setting one up fast.
Okay.
For analysis, you need the right gear. Dedicated forensic workstations, clean laptops aren't compromised, packet sniffers to capture network traffic, specialized forensic software, and trusted media like clean OS installers or boot disks.
Sounds like a specialized IT setup.
It is. And you also need essential resources. Up-to-date lists of network ports and what they're used for, documentation for your systems, network diagrams, crucial for understanding where things are, lists of your critical assets, baselines of what normal activity looks like on your network and systems.
A baseline, so you can spot what's not normal.
Exactly. And even cryptographic hashes of critical system faults.
The hashes, like a digital fingerprint.
Precisely. A fingerprint of what a critical file should look like, so you can quickly check if it's been tampered with or replaced by malware during an incident. And for mitigation, you need things like clean system images ready for quick restoration of compromised machines.
That sounds like a lot to keep organized and on hand. NIST mentioned something called a jump kit, right? What's that about?
Yeah, Section 3.1.1 talks about creating a jump kit. It's basically a portable case, like a toolkit, that's pre-packed with all the essential materials you'd need immediately if you have to go investigate something physically on site.
Like a cybersecurity first aid kit you can just grab and run with.
Exactly that. The whole point is speed. Having a jump kit ready means you don't waste precious minutes scrambling to find a spare laptop or a network cable or some blank USB drives when an incident is unfolding.
What goes in it, typically?
Things like a laptop loaded with all your essential forensic tools, backup devices, blank media, network cables, maybe even a camera to document the physical scene, and critical paperwork like evidence labels and chain of custody forms. And the guidance specifically warns not to borrow things from it for other tasks, so it's always fully stocked and ready.
Okay, so preparation is extensive. It covers prevention, planning, policy, and having your actual response tools and go bags ready. That makes a lot of sense. What comes next in the cycle once you suspect something's actually happened?
That brings us to phase 2, detection and analysis. This is where you figure out that something is happening or maybe already has happened, and then try to understand what it actually is.
And Signia stressed that rapid detection is key, but NIST points out it can be really challenging. Why is this phase often so difficult in practice?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is just the sheer volume of data. Think about it. You've got countless logs coming from servers, firewalls, workstations, security tools, alerts firing off everywhere. It can be totally overwhelming.
Information overload.
Exactly. And mixed in with that are false positives, things that look suspicious according to some rule but turn out to be perfectly benign. Section 3.2 in the NIST doc acknowledges this. Sifting the real threats out from all that noise takes significant effort and expertise.
So how do you find the needle in the haystack? What does NIST recommend looking for?
You look for what they call precursors and indicators. A precursor is a sign that an incident might be about to happen. Maybe you see web server logs showing someone scanning for known vulnerabilities. An indicator, on the other hand, is a sign that an incident has happened or is happening right now. It's more concrete evidence of malicious activity.
Okay, give me some examples of those indicators from the guidance.
Sure. The text lists things like an alert from your intrusion detection system, your antivirus software flagging a malicious file. Maybe you spot a file with a really weird name or extension that shouldn't be there, seeing tons of failed login attempts for a single account, or noticing unusual network traffic, like a huge amount of data suddenly being uploaded to an external IP address late at night.
Where do these signs usually come from? What are the sources?
NIST points to several common sources. You've got your dedicated security tools, obviously IDPS's antivirus, security information and event management systems, or SIEMs analyzing logs. You've got the raw audit logs from operating systems and applications themselves. Public information can be a source too, like threat intel feeds or vulnerability disclosures.
Right.
And critically, people. That includes your own users reporting something strange on their machine. My computer is acting weird. But also, very importantly, other organizations. Maybe someone contacts you saying they're seeing attack traffic coming from your network.
So you might be compromised and not even know it until someone else tells you.
It happens all the time. That's why the guidance stresses the importance of having clear, well-publicized ways for outside parties to report potential incidents to you, like a dedicated security email address or phone number.
Good point. So, okay, you have some indicators. What makes the analysis part tricky, even then?
Well, like we said, filtering out the high volume and false positives is a big part of it. But beyond that, it requires really deep, specialized technical knowledge to accurately figure out if an indicator is truly part of a real incident, understand how widespread it is the scope, and determine how serious it is the severity. You need skilled analysts who can connect the dots between maybe seemingly unrelated pieces of evidence.
Sounds like detective work.
Yep.
So what does NIST recommend to make this analysis phase more effective, less overwhelming?
They give several good recommendations. Automate the initial analysis and correlation as much as you can using your security tools. Use those baselines you established during preparation. Knowing what normal looks like makes anomalies jump out. Perform event correlation. This is key. Look across logs from multiple sources. Firewall, application logs, host logs, network traffic, IDPS alerts, to piece together the full attack chain.
Don't just look at one system in isolation.
Exactly. Centralize your logging, get all that data into one place if possible, makes correlation way easier. Keep all your system clocks synchronized. This is absolutely critical for accurately timing events across different systems. If the clocks are off, your timeline is meaningless. And maintain a knowledge-based document, past incidents, indicators, attacker techniques, so analysts can quickly recognize patterns they've seen before.
That all sounds like building a really sophisticated detection capability over time. NIST also lists different attack vectors categories of how attacks happen. What are those?
Right. Section 3.2.1 lists several categories. Things like External removable media, someone plugs in an infected USB drive. Attrition, like brute force password guessing, or DDoS attacks trying to exhaust resources. Web-based attacks exploiting vulnerabilities in websites or web apps like cross-site scripting or SQL injection. Email phishing, malicious attachments, that sort of thing. Impersonation like spoofing emails or maybe man-in-the-middle attacks. Improper usage when an authorized user violates policy, intentionally or not. Loss or theft of equipment, laptops, phones containing sensitive data, and then just other as a catch-all.
Are these meant to be strict classifications for every single incident?
Not really. The guidance says they're not intended to provide definitive classification. It's more about using them as a basis for defining specific handling procedures. Knowing the general type of attack often dictates the immediate actions you need to take and the overall response strategy. A lost laptop requires a very different response than a web server compromise.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've detected something, you've analyzed it, you have a decent idea of what's happening and maybe how they got in. What's the critical next step in the life cycle?
Now you move into phase 3. Containment, eradication, and recovery. This is really the active, hands-on response phase.
And the goal here is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the goals are clear. Stop the bleeding, contain the incident so it doesn't spread further. Clean up the mess, eradicate the cause, get rid of the malware, revoke the attacker's access, fix the vulnerability they exploited, and finally, get things back to normal, recover your systems and operations securely.
Containment first, I assume, like isolating the problem.
Usually, yes. Section 3.3.1 talks about choosing the right containment strategy. This really depends on the specific incident. It might mean disconnecting an infected machine from the network entirely. Or maybe just shutting down a specific compromised service. Or perhaps blocking certain malicious IP addresses at your firewall. The key is to isolate the affected systems or network segments quickly to limit the damage and prevent the attacker from moving laterally to other systems.
And while you're doing this, collecting evidence is also happening. Or did that come later?
It often happens in parallel, and it's crucially important, as Section 3.3.2 covers. While your top priority is stopping the attack and getting back online, you might need the evidence you collect later for legal reasons, maybe disciplinary action if it was an insider, or just for a deep forensic analysis to truly understand exactly what happened.
So you need proper procedures for that.
Absolutely. Documented procedures for evidence gathering and handling are essential. NIST talks about the need for chain of custody forms, tracking exactly who handled the evidence, when and where to prove it wasn't tampered with, and detailed logs about the evidence itself.
Like a proper evidence trail, what kind of digital evidence is most important to capture?
Section 3.6 highlights capturing volatile data first. That's the stuff that exists only in a system's active memory or current state and disappears if you just shut the machine down.
Like what specifically?
Things like active network connections, what processes are currently running, who's logged in, what files are open, the system's network configuration right now, and even the contents of RAM, the system memory itself. Capturing this quickly and in a forensically sound way is critical before it's lost.
And for data on hard drives?
For disk evidence, the strong recommendation is to obtain full forensic disk images, not just standard file backups. An image is a bit-for-bit copy of the entire drive. It's considered much better for investigation because it captures everything, including deleted files or hidden data areas, without altering the original drive. You analyze the image on a separate, clean forensic workstation, keeping the original evidence pristine.
Right, preserving the digital scene of the crime before you clean it up. Okay, so after containment and evidence collection, you move to eradicate the threat itself.
Exactly. That's covered in Section 3.3.4. Eradication involves removing the malicious components, deleting the malware, disabling rogue user accounts the attacker created, things like that. It also means identifying and mitigating the vulnerabilities that allowed the attacker in or let them spread. You have to fix the hole they came through.
And then recovery.
Then recovery. This is where you restore the affected systems to a known good state. Ideally, you restore from clean system images you prepared earlier, or from verified backups that you're sure weren't also compromised. You can't just turn the compromised system back on. After restoring, you absolutely have to test and confirm that everything is operating normally and, importantly, securely again.
Okay, that covers the main response actions. What's the final phase?
Yeah,
the one you said often gets skipped.
Phase 4. Post-incident activity. And you're right, this phase is absolutely vital for learning and improving your security, improving your response capability. But it's often the one that gets short shrift when everyone's exhausted and just wants to put the incident behind them.
Yeah, it's easy to just breathe a sigh or weep once the fire's out. But if you don't figure out why it started and how you could have done better,
you're just setting yourself up for the same thing to happen again. Absolutely. Section 3.4.1 details holding lessons learned meetings. These should happen pretty soon after any major incident while everything's still fresh in people's minds.
What happens in those meetings?
You review what happened chronologically, how well the incident response team and the existing procedures performed, what information or tools were needed but weren't available quickly enough, what could have been done differently at each stage, how communication and information sharing worked or didn't work, and ultimately what corrective actions, new tools, or process changes are needed to prevent recurrence or just improve the response next time.
That feedback loop seems critical for getting better over time. What about using the data you collect from incidents more broadly, not just for one post-mortem?
Good point. Section 3.4.2 talks about using the collected incident data and metrics to improve the overall IR program, but the focus should be on collecting actionable data, not just, tallying the raw number of incidents detected.
What kind of metrics are useful then?
The guidance gives examples of objective metrics to assess effectiveness. Did the team follow the established policy and procedures? How effective was detection? How quickly was it found? How much damage was actually caused? Was the initial attack vector identified? Did the same incident happen again later? What was the estimated cost of the incident? And comparing the initial assessed impact versus the final impact after response actions were taken.
So measuring how well you responded and how much you reduced the impact rather than just counting bad things.
Yes, exactly. The guidance even specifically notes that simple metrics like total number of incidents aren't very useful for comparing your organization to others because everyone defines incidents slightly differently. You also want subjective assessments. Ask the team members, ask the owners of the affected systems how they felt the response went, what challenges they faced.
And finally, evidence retention. You collect all this evidence, you can't just delete it once the lessons learned meeting is over, right?
Right. Section 3.4.3 mentions the need for clear policies on how long to keep incident-related data and evidence. For U.S. federal agencies, there's a specific rule, GRS 24, which requires keeping incident handling records for 3 years after all follow-up is done. But your organization will need its own policy based on its specific legal, regulatory, and operational requirements.
Okay, so NIST 800-61R2, even though it's technically withdrawn now, it really laid out an incredibly thorough foundation for incident response, covering that whole life cycle from preparation right through to learning from experience. It's the bedrock.
It absolutely is. And building on that bedrock, let's talk about actually establishing and running the incident response capability itself, beyond just handling one single event. How do you structure the team, the processes to be effective long-term?
Good question. What does NIST say is key to getting that formal capability set up?
Well, Section 2 of 800-61-112 really emphasizes making it a formal capability. It shouldn't just be, whoever's around scrambling when something happens. You need structure.
Right.
The first step is clearly defining what actually constitutes an incident for your specific organization. What events trigger this formal response process? And then, as we touched on in preparation, you absolutely need those 3 core documents: a policy, a plan, and procedures.
Policy, plan, procedures. Can you quickly recap the difference?
Sure. The policy is the high-level framework. It defines what an incident is, assigns roles and responsibilities, sets reporting requirements. The plan is more like your roadmap. It outlines the goals for your IR capability, how you'll achieve them, maybe includes metrics for success. And procedures are the detailed step-by-step playbooks based on the policy and plan, telling analysts exactly what steps to take for specific types of incidents.
Having those 3 clearly defined seems like job number 1 for any organization getting serious about IR.
Right.
What about the people involved? How should the team itself be structured?
Section 2.4.1 discusses different staffing models. NIST lists 3 main approaches. You can have a team made up entirely of your own employees, a fully in-house team. You could have a partially outsourced model where you have some internal staff but also rely on external support for certain skills or surge capacity. Or you could go with a fully outsourced model where you essentially contract out the entire IR function to a third-party provider.
And it seems like both the Signia analysis and the NIST guidance specifically call out those outsourced models as pretty common options.
They do. Outsourcing is definitely a significant part of the landscape. Section 2.4.2 in NIST 800-61-2 talks specifically about things to consider when outsourcing, and the Cygnia material presents it as a viable strategy, especially for organizations that maybe lack the internal resources or don't have the very specific, deep expertise needed for complex incidents.
So if you don't have enough people, or you can't find or afford those high-end forensic analysts internally, bringing in an external firm is a practical choice.
It absolutely can be. But, and this is a big but, you have to go into it with your eyes open and do your homework. NIST lists several really important considerations. You need to carefully evaluate the provider's experience and expertise. Do they really know what they're doing? Do their capabilities align with your specific needs and any regulatory requirements you have? Due diligence is critical here.
Makes sense. What are some of the potential pitfalls or challenges NIST warns about?
Well, there are several potential issues you need to think about and plan for. Concerns about the quality of the provider's work if you haven't vetted them properly. Big questions around the division of responsibilities, especially when it comes to making critical operational decisions, like taking a major system offline during an attack. Who gets the final say, you or the provider? Definitely. Also, how comfortable are you granting an external party access to potentially very sensitive information during a crisis? Will they lack crucial context or specific knowledge about your unique environment that your internal team would have? Can they effectively correlate data across all your different systems if they don't have full visibility? And how will they handle incidents that require someone physically on site at multiple locations if needed?
Those are really significant points. You're essentially letting someone into the heart of your operations during your worst moments.
Yeah.
The Cygnia source also mentioned something specific about using outsourcing for speed, didn't it?
Yes, incident response retainers. That's a key concept. Cygnia highlights these because they provide pre-established service-level agreements, or SLAs, specifically guaranteeing response speed.
So you pay upfront for guaranteed quick help.
Exactly. When you're under active attack, minutes matter incredibly. Having that retainer contract already in place with agreed-upon response times means you get help much, much faster than if you had to suddenly find a reputable firm, negotiate terms, and sign contracts while your network is burning down. It cuts out all that initial delay.
That seems really valuable. And Cygnia also mentioned Managed Detection and Response, MDR, as part of this picture.
Right. MDR is often discussed alongside IR outsourcing. The Cygnia material mentions MDR vendors as a way to get 24/7 monitoring and improve overall response capabilities, especially for organizations that can't staff around-the-clock Security Operations Center or SOC themselves.
So MDR is like having an outsourced SOC doing the detection and initial response.
In essence, yes. They provide continuous threat hunting, monitoring, and often initial response actions. Cygnia even references some of their other guides on choosing MDR vendors and comparing MDR to traditional SIEMs, showing it's a key part of the modern security services landscape.
Okay, so outsourcing, whether for full IR or for MDR, it's definitely a viable tool in the toolbox, but it requires really careful planning, clear contracts, understanding the limitations, and ideally, having those retainer agreements sorted out before you actually need them.
Definitely. It's absolutely not a set it and forget it kind of solution. And look, regardless of your staffing model, whether you're fully in-house, fully outsourced, or somewhere in between, something that's absolutely vital in today's world is coordination and information sharing.
This deep dive into cybersecurity incident response is supported by our sponsor at www.cisomarketplace.com.
Yeah, and if you're looking for potential solutions or resources related to building out these capabilities we're discussing, maybe tools for better detection or partners for outsourcing, maybe exploring those MDR options or other services to really enhance your security posture, a marketplace that's specifically designed for security leaders, for CISOs, could be a really helpful place to start navigating those options.
Find what you need at www.cisomarketplace.com. Check them out. Okay, so we've covered the foundational NIST lifecycle, how to build the capability, staffing, outsourcing. But the threat landscape itself, it's not static, right? It's constantly changing. What's evolving out there, and how does that impact preparing for, say, 2025 and beyond?
That's a huge question, and a big part of that evolving landscape is definitely the regulatory environment. We're seeing more and more requirements coming down the pike, particularly aimed at critical infrastructure sectors. Governments are recognizing the systemic risk that cyber incidents pose to society.
You're talking about things like CISO in the U.S., the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act.
Exactly that. CISO enacted in 2022. The CISO fact sheet we looked at lays out its main goals and provisions pretty clearly.
So what are the key requirements under CIRCIA that critical infrastructure organizations really need to get ready for?
Well, the big ones are the reporting mandates. CIRCIA requires CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to develop new regulations. And these regulations will compel covered entities, mainly those in critical infrastructure, to report covered cyber incidents within a very tight time frame, just 72 hours after they reasonably believe an incident has occurred.
72 hours, that's fast.
It is. And for ransomware attacks specifically, if they make a payment, they have to report that ransom payment even faster within 24 hours of making it.
Wow, okay, 72 hours for a significant incident, only 24 hours if you pay a ransom. Those are really strict deadlines. Much faster than maybe many organizations are used to or even capable of meeting right now.
They absolutely are. And it's not just about reporting to CISA. The Act also pushes for faster information sharing between different federal agencies. If any federal agency receives an incident report after the final rules take effect, they have to share it with CISA within 24 hours. And CISA, in turn, has to make the information it receives available to certain other relevant federal agencies also within 24 hours.
So there's a clear push for speed and broader information sharing across the government, trying to get better situational awareness faster.
That's definitely the goal.
This sounds like a really significant change for those covered organizations. It basically forces a higher level of maturity and speed in their incident response process just to meet the compliance requirements. Where are we in actually implementing these rules? Are they in effect now?
Not yet. CIRCIA requires a formal rulemaking process, which always takes time. CISA had 24 months from the Act's enactment in March 2022 to publish a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM. Then they have another 18 months after that to issue the final rule. So the specific details are still being worked out through public comments and agency coordination.
So they're consulting with industry.
Yes, CISA is actively consulting with stakeholders, the sector risk management agencies, SRMAs for different critical sectors, the Department of Justice, other government agencies, and a newly created Cyber Incident Reporting Council, which is supposed to help harmonize all the different federal reporting requirements. They've also been doing requests for information, RFIs, and holding listening sessions to get input from industry.
Okay, so the key message here for anyone involved with critical infrastructure or maybe providing services to critical infrastructure is keep a very, very close eye on these developing CIRCIA regulations. Participate in the process if you can, and start preparing your incident response program now to be able to meet those potential 72-hour and 24-hour reporting timelines. It adds real regulatory teeth to that need for speed we talked about earlier.
Absolutely critical. Compliance is becoming a huge driver for IR maturity. And speaking of critical infrastructure, that honorary source, the one from May 30, 2025, it paints an even starker picture of the threat landscape we need to consider. We're talking beyond just individual incidents now.
Right, this isn't just about a single data breach or one company getting hit by ransomware.
Not at all. This is about the potential for coordinated, sustained cyber assaults against vital sectors. Think electric grids, water systems, transportation networks, emergency communications, potentially lasting for days or weeks.
That sounds like cyber warfare territory.
Yeah.
What was the main, maybe uncomfortable takeaway from MITRE's analysis and exercise?
The really stark takeaway is that focusing only on isolated breach response, following the standard NIST phases to clean up after one specific event, it's just not enough against that kind of threat. The priority has to fundamentally shift.
Shift how?
From just recovering from an attack after it's finished to achieving sustained resilience. That means being able to continue operating critical functions through persistent, prolonged attacks, even when your systems are degraded, maybe even partially offline.
Operate through it, not just clean up afterwards.
Yeah.
That's a massive mindset shift. It requires a totally different kind of planning, doesn't it?
It really does. It's almost like a civil defense mindset, but applied to the cyber domain. A MITRE actually lays out 5 steps for critical infrastructure readiness in this kind of context.
What are they?
Fostering that civil defense mindset among everyone, leadership included. Planning specifically for how you'll manage extremely limited resources during a major emergency. Planning for how you'll operate under extreme conditions, maybe manually if automation fails. Strengthening your emergency communications, assuming they might also be targeted, and ensuring your workforce is actually ready and able to operate under those kinds of stressful, degraded conditions.
What specific challenges did their exercise highlight that maybe current plans don't fully address?
They pointed out some really worrying things. Cascading impacts how failure in one sector, like power, could cripple others, like water treatment or communications. The potential failure of mutual aid agreements between utilities if everyone is hit simultaneously in a widespread event.
Right. You can't borrow crews if everyone needs them.
Exactly. Contingency plans often focus too much on isolated incidents, not these large-scale, multi-sector, prolonged disruptions. They also found that organizations often overestimate the resilience of their communication plans. The standard PACE plans, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. Voice systems might not be enough, backups might be limited, and they even raised concerns about needing to authenticate communications against potential deepfakes in a crisis.
Wow, deepfakes in emergency comms.
Yeah. And finally, workforce availability could plummet during a prolonged emergency if staff can't get to work or their families are impacted or they're just exhausted.
Those are incredibly serious challenges. It paints a picture where traditional IR, while necessary, is just nowhere near sufficient. What did MITRE recommend to start moving towards this sustained resilience idea?
They had several recommendations. Owners and operators need to regularly test their contingency plans using exercises that simulate these widespread, prolonged scenarios, not just single failures. Governments at all levels, state, local, tribal, territorial, need to work much more closely with the private sector on understanding interdependencies and coordinating resources during these wide impact events.
More collaboration.
Much more. Organizations need to enhance their cyber resiliency plans to explicitly include operating in degraded modes. Train personnel for manual or disconnected operations if their automated systems go down. Strengthen communication protocols with robust backup systems and better authentication. Create contingency staffing plans to make sure essential functions can continue even with reduced staff. And think about how to support critical staff and their families during long emergencies to keep them available and focused.
Okay, this really elevates the conversation, doesn't it? Incident response becomes just one critical piece of a much bigger puzzle involving organizational, sectoral, and even national-level resilience against sophisticated, potentially crippling attacks aimed at disrupting society itself.
It absolutely shifts the frame from just handling a single technical event to managing systemic risk and ensuring operational survival in what could be a very hostile digital environment.
Okay, let's bring it back down to some practical tools and approaches for a minute. Things practitioners use day to day. That NIST 800-61R2, even though it's superseded, it wasn't just high-level theory, right? It had some practical appendices, too.
It did, yeah. Appendix G, for example, has a useful summary checklist of the main incident handling steps, kind of a quick reference guide. And Appendix A provides a whole set of incident handling scenarios.
Scenarios, you mean like practice drills on paper?
Exactly like that. It walks through various example incidents that are still very common today, like a denial of service attack against your DNS servers, or a website defacement, data theft from a database, a compromised database server itself, things like that. And for each one, it poses questions based on the life cycle phases.
How are those useful, especially given the complex threats we were just talking about?
Well, they're great for testing how prepared you actually are. They help you validate your written procedures. Do they actually work in this specific situation? They let you practice the response steps mentally or even in a tabletop exercise. They force you to think through the process with specific constraints. Who would I call first in this scenario? What if X happened instead of Y? How would that change my response?
So they help turn the abstract plan into more concrete actions and maybe reveal gaps before a real crisis hits.
Exactly. And that connects directly to the need for readiness and training that MITRE was emphasizing for those bigger resilience challenges. You have to practice.
That makes sense. It's about actually using those plans and procedures we talked about earlier, stress testing them.
And speaking of practice and what practitioners are dealing with, we also looked at some community discussions from Reddit.
Yeah, that Reddit snapshot gives a really interesting pulse check on what people in the trenches are actually talking about, wrestling with day to day. You see lots of thread titles that reflect these very practical implementation challenges.
Like what?
Things like Cyber Incident Response Playbook, Best Practices, or simply Incident Response Playbooks and how detailed do you get with your playbooks, or Incident Response Plan when it should be triggered. That definitely reinforces how important those plans and playbooks we discussed from NIST really are. The community isn't just saying, yeah, we need them. They're actively trying to figure out how to make them good and usable.
Precisely. It shows that putting these concepts into practice effectively is an ongoing challenge, and people are looking to share what works. And you see other related threads showing broader concerns too. What's an underrated cybersecurity practice? Will Les stay updated with cybersecurity trends, cybersecurity basics, and what are some of the biggest problems we face today in cybersecurity?
It kind of reminds you, if you're out there struggling with this stuff, you're definitely not alone. The whole cybersecurity community is engaged in these discussions, sharing knowledge, trying to collectively raise the bar on practices like incident response.
Absolutely. And all of this, the life cycle steps, building the capability, the coordination challenges, the practical tools, these community discussions, it all fits into, or should fit into, broader frameworks that organizations use to manage their overall cybersecurity risk in a more structured way.
You mean like the NIST cybersecurity framework, CSF?
Exactly. The NIST CSF, which is now in version 2.0, released February 26, 2024. It's designed as a voluntary tool, but a really influential one for organizations of basically all sizes and in any sector to manage and reduce their cybersecurity risk. It's specifically designed to be adaptable. They say it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Makes sense. Different organizations have different risks and resources. What are the main components of CSF 2.0?
It's got a few key parts. There's the core, which is basically a taxonomy, a structured list of desired cybersecurity outcomes. It's organized into functions, categories, and subcategories, giving you a common language.
Sure.
Then there are profiles, which an organization uses to describe its current cybersecurity posture, current profile, and its desired target posture, target profile, using the language of the core. Helps identify gaps.
Okay.
And then there are the tiers. These describe the level of rigor and sophistication of an organization's cybersecurity risk governance and management practices.
Tiers, like maturity levels for how well you manage risk.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. CSF 2.0 figure 4 shows them. They range from tier 1, which is partial, meaning risk management is kind of ad hoc, reactive, not much formal process. Tier 2 is risk informed. There's some awareness, some practices exist, but they might not be formalized or consistently applied. Tier 3 is repeatable. You got formal policies and procedures. Practices are pretty consistent. And Tier 4 is adaptive. The organization is actively adapting its practices based on lessons learned, predictive indicators, and continuously improving its ability to respond.
Adaptive sounds like the goal, especially given the threats we've discussed. How does CSF connect directly back to incident response?
Well, incident response and recovery are absolutely fundamental parts of the CSF core itself. Response RS and Recover RC are two of the 6 core functions in CSF 2.0, right alongside Govern, Identify, Protect, and Detect. You can see it in Figure 2 of the CSF document. So having strong IR capabilities is essential to implementing the CSF and managing risk effectively under this framework.
So it's baked right in.
Baked right in. Plus, the CSF 2.0 also explicitly addresses managing supply chain risks under the Govern function, GVSC, and improving risk communication and integration across the whole organization. And those tie directly back to our earlier discussions about managing third-party risk from outsourcing and the need for external coordination that NIST 861 highlighted.
And this is where that crucial connection you mentioned earlier comes in with the new NIST Incident Response Guide, 861 Revision 3. He said it's a CSF 2.0 community profile.
Exactly. This is such a key point about how NIST's guidance has evolved. Remember the full title. Incident Response Recommendations and Considerations, a CSF 2.0 community profile. This explicitly shows that the latest current official IR guidance from NIST is designed specifically to be integrated with and understood within the structure and context of the CSF 2.0 framework. It's not just a standalone IR document anymore. It's part of a holistic risk management approach.
Okay, so the CSF provides the big picture, the overall structure and goals for managing risk, and then detailed guides like 800-61R3 give you the specific how-to for achieving the outcomes related to incident response within that structure. It really ties it all together.
It does. It provides a much clearer roadmap for how organizations can mature their capabilities in a coordinated way. And finally, just to underscore why all this planning, coordination, and maturity is so incredibly critical, let's touch briefly on who's behind some of the most advanced threats organizations are up against.
You mean nation-state actors. We're not just talking about cyber criminals looking for money here.
Exactly. The Cybersecurity Tech Accord source we looked at, Securing a Shifting Landscape, it discusses how corporations perceive the threat from nation-state cyber attacks, and it highlights just how seriously organizations are taking this particular risk.
What does that source tell us about how companies are viewing this threat?
Well, it includes a really telling quote from Charles Carmichael, who's a well-known incident response leader at Mandiant. He points out that the SolarWinds supply chain attack, which was widely attributed to a nation-state actor, it forced the entire industry to fundamentally rethink how they manage third-party risk. And it starkly highlighted the sheer level of sophistication and scale that nation-state operations can achieve.
Yeah, that attack was a massive wake-up call, wasn't it? Showing how deeply they could penetrate and how widespread the impact could be.
It truly was. And the Tech Accord source includes a chart showing how concerned corporations are about actually falling victim to a nation-state attack. The overall level of concern is very high, and it's consistently high across different regions: North America, Europe, Asia Pacific. This isn't some abstract threat people read about. It's something global organizations are actively worried about impacting them directly.
So it's a real and present concern. How confident do these organizations feel about their ability to actually handle such an attack if it happened?
That's where it gets interesting. Another figure in the source shows their perceived ability to mitigate the effects of a nation-state attack. And the responses are really quite split. You have some saying they feel much stronger or somewhat stronger than a few years ago, but many are in the neither stronger nor weaker category, and a worrying number feel somewhat weaker or even much weaker.
So confidence levels are mixed and often not very high when facing that specific kind of advanced adversary.
Exactly. There's a clear gap between the perceived threat level and the confidence in being able to handle it effectively.
And that high level of concern, coupled with those often low confidence levels, it really just hammers home why everything we've discussed, robust incident response processes, proactive coordination, especially with government and peers like NIST and MITRE advise, and really diligently managing that third-party and supply chain risk like SIGNIA, NIST, and CSF all emphasize why it's all so incredibly critical in today's world. You need a very high degree of maturity to even start tackling these kinds of threats effectively.
They're absolutely all interconnected pieces of the puzzle needed to build resilience against the most complex and potentially damaging attacks we face.
We want to take another moment to thank our sponsor, www.cisomarketplace.com.
Finding the right tools, the right technologies, maybe the right partners to help build or enhance your incident response capability, whether that's implementing a framework like CSF 2.0, getting ready for new regulations like CRCIA, or tackling those sophisticated risks we just talked about, it can be really challenging to navigate that crowded vendor landscape.
Find the resources you need to tackle these critical cybersecurity challenges at www.cisomarketplace.com. Okay, so we've really dived deep today into a lot of material, foundational guidance, evolving threats, new regulations, practical challenges. If we were to boil it down, what are the absolute key takeaways you think people should leave with?
Well, first, understanding that core incident response lifecycle preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activity. Mastering those steps is still the absolute foundation. Second, the non-negotiable importance of having a formal IR capability built on clear policies, plans, and usable procedures. We saw even in the community discussions how practitioners are still focused on getting that right.
Right. And we looked at the practical side of that, how to organize your team, the strategic considerations around outsourcing, when it makes sense, what the pitfalls are, and maybe most importantly, the absolute necessity of coordination and information sharing with others, because modern threats just don't care about organizational boundaries.
Then we saw how the landscape is shifting rapidly. New regulations like CIRCIA are coming, demanding much faster reporting, especially for critical infrastructure, turning speed into a compliance issue, not just a best practice. And that MITRE perspective really challenged us to think beyond just recovering from isolated incidents towards building sustained resilience and the ability to operate through prolonged, sophisticated attacks.
And finally, we saw how broader frameworks like NIST CSF 2.0 provide that essential structure for managing all these risks holistically. They integrate incident response into the overall cybersecurity strategy, and the newest guidance, like 861R3, is explicitly designed to fit within that framework, giving us a roadmap towards greater maturity reaching those higher tiers of risk management.
It really paints a picture of incident response not as some static checklist, but as a dynamic, essential, and constantly evolving discipline that has to adapt to threats that are getting more sophisticated and more systemic all the time.
Which leaves us with, I think, a really fundamental question for you, our listener, to think about after hearing all this. Given the sheer complexity and scale of the threats we discussed, things like sophisticated nation-states targeting critical infrastructure, potentially with sustained campaigns like MITRE highlighted, and considering the pressure from upcoming regulations like CIRCIA with those very tight reporting deadlines,
How can organizations realistically bridge the gap? How do they move from just doing basic incident handling, maybe tier 2 or tier 3 in the CSF, to achieving truly adaptive resilience, that tier 4 level in practice? What do you think, based on everything we covered today, is the single most significant gap or hurdle that organizations need to overcome to make that leap, to get from where many are now to where they really need to be to face the threat landscape of the future?
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gave you some valuable insights and maybe a few of those aha moments. Think about that question. What's the biggest hurdle to achieving true adaptive resilience today? We'll catch you on the next one.